Health Committee member. I will be your facilitator for today. We are presenting PFLAG LGBTQ Community Support presented by René Rives. A recorded version of this workshop will be available. First, we will begin our workshop session A at this time. If you have any questions during the presentation, type them in the chat. We will leave it open for a 10 to 15 minute discussion and questions, followed by filling out the evaluation survey monkey sent to all attendees. Moving right along, we would like to turn the time over. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our presenter today, René Rives, Program Manager for Greater Boston PFLAG, who is going to talk to us about LGBTQ community support. Within 15 years of professional experience and background in liberal arts study and expressive art therapy, his career spans over industries including youth work, education, and public health to support educators. René is particularly passionate about advocating for BIPOC, LGBTQ, plus youth populations, and his guided in partnering with LGBTQ plus populations to meet their needs and challenge oppression systems. Finally, he is also just a fascinating person, and we're all in for a treat today. With further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming René Rives.
Oh my goodness, what an introduction. Thank you so much, Katricia.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. My name is René, and I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. All that means is that's how I like to be referred to when you're not using my name in the third person. And I'm here with Oscar, who also works full-time at Greater Boston PFLAG, and Tracy, who is here from our Speakers Bureau, and we're going to hear from her in the second half of this session to hear her story as a parent. I am going to, do y'all want to introduce yourselves, or can I just jump right in?
Hi, everybody. I'm Oscar. I work with René at Greater Boston PFLAG, and I'm really happy to be here. I am here to support René in supporting all of you. So if throughout the program you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. You can send it to everybody, but if you would prefer, you can just send it directly to me, and I will make sure that we get to as many of the questions as humanly possible. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Oscar. And Tracy, just if you want to say hi.
Hi, I'm Tracy. I use she, her pronouns, and as René said, I'm a parent of 2 transgender children, and I'm happy to share my story as part of our Speakers Bureau today.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for having us here. So before we get started, we're gonna just go quickly over some training guidelines. This is we want to create a safe space, and going beyond that, we want to create a brave space, because safety, safe space is relative. What may feel safe for me may not necessarily feel safe for you, and vice versa. So what does brave space mean? Brave space means being comfortable or getting comfortable with discomfort. Oftentimes when we're learning new things, it can feel a bit uncomfy, but that can be part of the learning process and part of growth. So I invite you to just know that it's okay. Discomfort is okay. It's normal, it's natural, and actually kind of expected, depending on your familiarity with the content. We encourage you to ask questions. That's definitely part of a brave space. This is a learning space, and we're going to have some time towards the end for actually a couple moments throughout the presentation to have some questions. I encourage you to be curious, curious about your own biases that may come up, curious about the subject matter, and whatever questions you ask, we're going to assume good intentions, and we hope that you assume best intentions from us as well. I don't know if we have. No, can we get a thumbs up if people are down with these guidelines? Awesome. We're going to keep it moving. So really what we're going to focus on in this session is language and terminology, a little bit of background information as to why we're even talking about this language and terminology, and understand the differences between some key concepts. Please stick around, come back for session 2, for part 2, where we're going to get more into some skill building and at least learning some guidelines about how to, what to do with this information, and how to best support LGBTQ plus youth in your community. So PFLAG, we are the largest and oldest national LGBTQ organization that works with families to create inclusive workplaces, communities, and schools through support groups. There are 16 plus support groups in Greater Boston alone for parents to connect with other parents and guardians and caregivers. And there are chapters all over Massachusetts. So I definitely encourage you, since y'all are coming in from all over the state, to check out the chapter closest to you for PFLAG. We also have an education arm. That's my role, is running trainings and workshops such as these. And then we do some state level advocacy work to push for more inclusive policies on a state and local level. What does LGBTQ plus LGBTQIA plus stand for? Here are the words. This is what they stand for. Here's the kind of most up-to-date, almost all inclusive pride flag in the corner that includes some of the identities that are often made invisible, such as intersex and asexual. I'm going to say as a shorthand LGBTQ throughout the program, but know that that's a stand-in for a much longer, larger acronym that includes many more identities. And I'm not going to take you through these words just yet, these terms just yet. I'm actually going to have some, we're going to hear from some young people about what these words and identities mean to them. Yep.
Girls always casually kind of talk to each other about their crushes, but I was always so afraid to just mention mine.
I decided to treat myself like I was nothing. Then I felt like everyone would just leave me.
One day I was driving with my dad to the beach and he goes, "Edson, look at those girls in those bikinis." And I just thought to myself, look at the guy next to them. And immediately after that, I always thought to myself, am I allowed to think that?
I didn't think that for once nobody was gonna not like me. I felt that I wasn't gonna like myself.
It's already challenging enough being a teen because you're just trying to figure out who you are in the world. Who am I? Who do I want to be in relation to other people? How do I like other people? Am I romantically attracted to certain people? Am I sexually attracted to certain people? Whoa, that's a lot to deal with.
Well, I first started to question my sexuality when I was 12 or 13 in 7th grade. Most of my friends had already come out as various different things, and I just started to wonder kind of about myself. At first I came out as bisexual because I felt that it would be easier. I later came out as a lesbian.
I always knew that something was different. I never knew what it was. I mean, I knew I could talk to my parents about absolutely anything, and at that point it was like school, people that are frustrating me, but that depth of personal issues, I still wasn't necessarily 100% ready to really say, you know what, I am gay.
I didn't really think that I was ever a lesbian, but I knew that I was attracted to women. So I guess that's where bisexual comes in for me. Up until the 11th grade, I was very embarrassed by the idea of being gay. As time went on, I knew that it wasn't going to go away. I saw women the same way I saw men.
It can be really challenging to talk about the LGBTQ community because as of today, there are so many different gender identities and sexual orientations. It can be really confusing for people. What is the difference between gender and sexuality?
LG and B are sexual orientations. It's about who you're attracted to.
Who you might be romantically attracted to or sexually attracted to. Gender is more about who you identify as.
You can identify as male, you can identify as female, gender neutral, gender queer, or gender fluid.
It's empowering because there's all these different identities. But then it's also overwhelming because there's all these different identities.
My super specialty has become working with gender nonconforming kids and transgender adolescents and young adults. The gender journey actually starts at birth, and sometimes even before birth. Is it a boy or a girl? That's one of the most prominent questions that's asked when somebody is pregnant. Looking at that baby's anatomy, we start making stories about what that child should do as they grow up.
I was confused about who I was. I always had like, you know, kind of like that little voice in your head saying your family will hate you. I identify as a transgender girl or just Zoe. So one day I'm talking to my brother and my brother's like, you're not a girl. And then he's like, you have that. And I was like, I know I have that, but doesn't everyone have that?
What's fascinating about younger gender nonconforming kids is they don't have a coming out process. They just like what they like and they tell us.
My dad, he used to throw away my mom's high heels because I used to walk around in the house with them.
They start to understand at 6 or 7 when they get into first grade, hey, you're a boy, you shouldn't like dolls, that's not okay. I'm not gonna be your friend if you like pink and that's your favorite color. And so they start to internalize those messages.
I wasn't physical with myself, I wasn't hard on anyone else. I didn't like myself.
They're sitting on what feels like a huge secret for a really long time, and that can be really damaging.
So I tried hiding who I was from myself, because at the time I didn't know what transgender was or the name of it. And I was telling her, Mom, I'm a girl. I know I'm a girl. I was born this way. And I was telling her, I need to be who I am.
All right, so hopefully that gives you not just the definitions for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender specifically, but some of the experiences of youth who carry some of those identities. And getting into some of the why this is important. You heard some of the young folks' stories, and here's a little bit of data. LGBTQ in Massachusetts, of all places, LGBTQ plus students are disproportionately facing really pretty huge challenges that stem from systems of oppression and individuals' oppressive behavior. So almost twice as likely to be bullied. That leads into more than 3 times as likely to skip school, and then being more likely to experience substance abuse because of having to cope with being in a world and being in environments where big parts of their identities are rejected at best in some cases. It really is important to know how to support LGBTQ youth so these statistics can go down, and these stats are also not inherently tied to these identities. It really is a result of how society treats folks carrying these identities. yeah, so, and it's all, and also like, it's not, there's a lot of resiliency in these communities as well, particularly from youth. And the good news is you can be that accepting and supportive adult that makes a real difference. And chances are, hopefully, if you're watching this, you already have made this kind of difference in a young person's life, either as an educator or as a parent, whether you know it or not. And we're going to go over this stat for part 2 as well, but just it's important to note the positive and the bright spot is that LGBTQ plus LGBTQ youth who had at least one accepting adult were 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year. So it really is a matter of life and death in many instances, and you can be the bright spot in a young person's life. Think about, and the video, I think, inherently touched on some of this just sort of naturally, but think about intersectionality. It's a really important lens to look at identity with. It was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a legal scholar who's still doing really great work. I recommend checking out her podcast, Intersectionality Matters. And she coined the term and the legal concept as well to describe the longstanding feelings of feminist and queer communities of color, especially being a Black woman in law school and facing both racism and sexism. So it's a theoretical, oh, Jackie's here, awesome. Welcome, Jackie. Intersectionality is a theoretical framework that recognizes that an individual may carry many identities, and those identities do not exist separately from one another, but rather are intrinsically linked. As you can see from the slide, there are many, many aspects to our identities that we carry with us wherever we go. And those are going to impact how we're treated and what we have to be aware of. So race, ethnicity, disability, nationality, gender identity, and sexual orientation are some of many. Other examples include religion, country of origin, immigration status, class, education. The list goes on. And again, those identities afford certain privileges, certain identities afford certain privileges in certain situations, and other identities make it so folks are marginalized because of what's valued by our broader culture. So example, me as a white guy, I've had several interactions with the police that ended in basically being banned from Fire Island. I think I'm probably still not allowed to go back, but I very well, like, being a white guy and spending my 21st birthday and having a run-in with the cops, I very well could have been arrested and caught up in the system if I were of a different race or ethnicity. It would have been a very different story, a very different outcome. And so with those identities, being a white man, I haven't, those carry a lot of privilege of just like things that I haven't had to think about or worry about. And then, yeah, as a man, just like I know I've been sexually harassed, I've been catcalled, but it's not something that is like constantly on my mind the way that it might be if I were a woman. And then like my queer identity has, it made it so I've been treated a variety of different ways, and definitely like, depending on my presentation on any given day, gotten funny looks or called names, or complimented, depending on who I'm interacting with. So yeah, identities really, intersectionality and intersecting identities are an important lens to look through, because I think often folks think about LGBTQ identities in a vacuum, and it's often associated with whiteness, but we know for a fact that there are so many intersections of race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and gender identity and all the other aspects of identity. And we don't want to make those identities and the complexities of those identities invisible. So yeah, I think I gave some examples. Here's some other examples to peruse at your leisure. We're going to keep it moving just in the interest of time. And I think we're supposed to, yeah, so any questions that have come up so far, or Oscar, that you think someone might have at this point?
Not as of yet. I think we can keep going.
Okay, okay. I will say, actually, we're going to get to that slide later. What does queer mean? Because that was not really covered by the video, and we'll get there. So a way to kind of to think about things a little differently, as well as through an intersectional lens, is the difference between binaries and spectrums. So the way our brains are wired, and also how we're raised, how we're taught, is often very black and white. And it's either or, it's this or that. It just means that there are two options. So there are boys and girls. There are old people, there are young people, there are straight people, there are gay people. And versus a spectrum, which is a lot closer to reality and really honors the diverse and reflects the diversity of how identities manifest, and just the beautiful variation of life on this earth in general. There's so many spectra. So instead of old and young, it's like there's a whole range of human development that gets overlooked from that black and white thinking. So there are infants, there are kids, which as a youth worker, I actually take issue with that word. There are children, there are youth, there are teens, there are young adults, middle age, infinite in-betweens and stages of development within even those labels. And then boy and girl, like there are a lot of non-binary gender identities that run the gamut between boy and girl, and as something like completely separate, which we'll get into in a little greater detail. And then attraction, like we know that bisexual people exist, pansexual people exist, and there's some similarities there, but all pansexual means is being attracted to somebody regardless of their gender, versus bisexual, which is being attracted to folks from two or more genders. Slight distinction there, and we may circle back to that, but so yeah, just we want to try and think a little more expansively, because it includes a greater number of people and a greater number of possibilities. And when it comes to, a lot of times people conflate or smush together sexual orientation and gender identity, and those are different things. Like who we're attracted to is how we feel in relation to towards other people. When it comes to gender and gender terminology, that's a whole other set of concepts. And just to break it down, when someone is born, they have a sex assigned at birth, either male, female, or intersex. It's based on what the doctor or medical community associates with specific external observable genitals. Secondary sex characteristics don't come out until later, so it really is based on that. And intersex is when somebody has a combination of what's typically thought of as female or male genitalia, but then there's also like so many other different combinations that would make someone intersex, including different chromosomes, XXY chromosomes, or it may not, sex characteristics that may not be apparent until puberty, when those secondary sex characteristics come into play. And that's what we often think of, especially in the binary mindset, as gender. It's like, okay, like you're assigned male at birth, then you're a boy, and then become a man, and then there are all kinds of expectations piled on top of that. We know that is not true. So challenging conventional wisdom. A different way to conceptualize gender is that gender identity is what's between your ears, not what was between your legs when you were born. It's up here, it's in your brain, it is a deeply felt internal sense of being. And again, different from orientation, that's how we feel in relation to other people. Gender identity is how we feel within ourselves and about ourselves. And then that may or may not tie into gender expression, because I identify as a man, but I may express myself in a more traditionally feminine way. And that's also relative as well and culturally defined. What's feminine in one culture may actually be masculine or neutral in another culture. So I need to paint my nails again, but I like to paint my nails. I like sparkles. I like to wear makeup sometimes. That doesn't mean that I identify as a woman. I have some fluidity to me, but that's gender expression may or may not correlate to one's gender identity. But it is a way for people to kind of signal to the world like what gender a person is. It can be if someone embraces a more, within the cultural context, more masculine kind of expression, so clothes that they wear, mannerisms, stuff like that. And then on the flip side of that, that impacts gender attribution, how your gender is perceived by others. If I'm like cross-dressing, essentially, my gender may be perceived differently than if I'm walking down the street, like what I'm wearing right now. And yeah, so that's a different way to kind of deconstruct and break down how we're taught about gender and thinking about it more expansively, making more room for a greater number of possibilities. So just remember that these are different things. So sex assigned at birth does not equal sexual orientation, does not equal romantic orientation. And gender identity does not necessarily equal sex assigned at birth. Those are different things, and gender expression is its own thing as well. So yeah, we kind of covered this in terms of intersex folks. Just to go in a little more, it's a normal variation. Intersex is a normal variation in sex traits that falls outside of typical conceptions of male and female. It's 2% of the population. It's as common as people with red hair. So I'm sure you've probably met a redhead, and it's just a lot more visible. And there's a lot of people aren't necessarily advertising that they're intersex. So chances are you have met an intersex person. 30 to 80% of intersex individuals undergo more than one surgery, non-consensually, often when they are babies. And that's something that still happens in this country, it happens worldwide. And the medical community is slowly starting to catch up in terms of leaving children's bodies alone and letting children decide eventually, once they get to an age where they're like, oh no, I actually don't want to alter my body at all. Or yes, I would like to go in a more like binary direction with my body. So yeah, 60%, as many as 60% of intersex adults live as a different gender that is typically associated with the sex assigned at birth. And here are some figures who are intersex. Pigeon on the right is really is an actor, and they're just really awesome. And they're also an intersex activist. And there's some great resources that connect the intersex community, because it can be a very isolating and lonely thing based on based on how binary we think even about sex assigned at birth. And so Interact is a youth intersex activist organization, and Amanda Sains, I'm not sure if I'm saying their name right, is the coordinator. And first intersex character on TV portrayed by an intersex actor. And then, I'm sorry, that's the person in the middle. The person on the left is Hannah Gabby Odlele, model and intersex activist. So we have 3 intersex activists right here. You can check them out. So sexual orientation, all that means is the desires and sexual feelings one experiences towards others. We're going to get into these boxes here. And something a colleague said that I really liked is that think about people with boxes as you would with cats and boxes. If you put a cat in a box, the cat is not going to be happy and it's going to be like pretty mad at you. But if a cat puts itself in the box, they're going to be just like, you know, living their best life and like just have, you know, doing whatever cats do in boxes. So just to acknowledge that we want to make sure that we're not putting these labels on other people. These are for people to define for themselves. And they are also like more labels. And some people don't really, for myself, I've part of my circuitous journey with identity has been kind of an aversion to labels, even to like saying I'm a man, for example. I feel like I'm René. that's my label. But anyway, so yeah, if you think of straight men, typically are attracted to women, straight women attracted to men, and then the on the dotted line box that I think shows some of that expansiveness is gay and queer. So anyone who's kind of not straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, queer, demisexual, and asexual. I think that the youth in the video kind of did a really good job of breaking down gay, lesbian, bisexual. I defined pansexual earlier. Bisexual and pansexual are similar in that folks are attracted to folks of many genders that may manifest in different ways. It really does. It's so individual. It depends on who you ask, even with some of these definitions. Demisexual is, I always thought, I learned something new about demisexual in the past couple of years, and that's basically it's under the asexual umbrella. Asexual is someone who experiences little to no sexual attraction, but that doesn't mean they're not going to be romantically attracted to somebody. And one example of that is demisexual, where someone needs an emotional connection in order to feel and experience sexual attraction for somebody. That's my current understanding. Again, it can vary based on who you ask and who who is carrying these identities. Queer, we're gonna get to queer. I promise. I keep saying that, but there's a larger section because it's a little bit complex. Can be complex. Romantic orientation, desires and romantic feelings one experiences towards others. So there can be a difference and a distinction there. Here we go, queer. So can you use the word queer? It depends. I'd say as a general rule of thumb, if you don't identify as queer and you're not referring to someone who identifies as queer, don't use the word. but because it has a long history of being used as a slur, and still does, depending on who's saying it and how it's being used. It's one of those words that's been reclaimed as a powerful word for folks who are not all. It's an umbrella term of folks who do not identify as straight or cisgender. Cisgender meaning someone's gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth. And it's also a political, in that inherently, it's a political word and kind of a political identity. There is a generational and geographic difference. So it is, the reclamation is typically more common in youth, although that's not universal. I know plenty of youth who really don't like that word. And it also depends on where in the world and where in the country folks are. I myself identify as queer. I feel like it resonates for me. It's broad, it encapsulates a lot. And also for me, the political aspect of the identity is that it's an expression of for me, the reclamation is like, yes, I am queer. I am different from these systems that have caused a lot of damage and continue to cause a lot of damage. And so in using that word, I'm positioning myself against those systems, as well as honoring my own identities and experiences. Gender identity. So yeah, we went over this, but just it's one's own internal understanding of their identity as a man, woman, both or neither. Cisgender man, someone who was assigned male at birth, identifies as a man. Cisgender woman, assigned female at birth, identifies as a woman. Transgender folks are folks whose gender identity is different from the gender that's typically associated with their sex assigned at birth. And some non-binary people identify as transgender, some people don't. Here's a little umbrella to help visualize it. So, and we have just about 2 minutes here before we get to Tracy's story. But yeah, so transgender umbrella includes transgender women, transgender men, and then the umbrella within the umbrella is non-binary, which is folks who are like, gender is a construct for some folks, again, not universal, but it's basically folks who are like, I don't buy into this. I don't identify with either as a man or a woman. I identify as something else entirely, my own gender. And there's precedent for this. A lot of pre-colonial places still have at least 3 genders, some have 5 or 6, and some examples that you may hear in the US are genderqueer, gender fluid, bigender, agender. So bigender identifying as 2 genders, agender not identifying as any gender, genderqueer, again, a little bit political there, and like gender is BS and I'm creating my own thing. Gender fluid is more like there's gender fluid and gender flux, and it's like it depends on how a person is feeling on it at any given moment or any given day, and to what extent, and then how they express that. It's more about the expression. So that is that brings us to Tracy. Just a quick look at non-binary identities. Here's some folks such as Elliot Page, Jonathan Van Ness, and they're both non-binary, and the native guy is John Sneezy, who identifies as Two-Spirit. This is from a powwow in Arizona, and I don't know their pronouns, so I'm just going to say they. They identify as Two-Spirit, which is a relatively new unifying term that a lot of Native folks across through the Americas have created as a way to reclaim the fact that before white European settlers came and imposed their culture and religion, there was a lot more fluidity and many more gender identities and gender roles in depending on the tribe, of course. And so that's a kind of a reclamation of itself and very culturally specific. So without further ado, and we're going to get into ally stuff next session, so please stick around, come on back for part 2, and you can learn how, like, what to do with all this information. Without further ado, Tracy, please tell us a little bit about your experience as a mom of two transgender folks.
Thank you so much. So as I said, my name is Tracy McKay. I use she, her pronouns, and I have 3 children, aged 19, 23, and 25. And for the first 17 years of parenting these amazing children, I thought I was raising 3 boys. That was something that was part of our identity as a family, and it was certainly part of my identity as a mom. And then about 7 years ago, both my oldest child and my youngest came to me, each without knowing about the other, to let me know that they were transgender. And it's been a little over 6 years now that both of them have been living full-time as the young women they always knew themselves to be. And I say that way very intentionally, but because what I have come to understand is that my kids did not switch from being boys to being girls. They were girls all along, and the rest of us just didn't know it. So as you can imagine, there were so many emotions going on at that time. First of all, we were surprised. My kids didn't give us any indication that their gender identity was anything other than what we all thought that it was. So for my husband and I, it felt like it had come, right out of the blue. We also felt sad. I was sad that my kids' lives would be so much harder than I ever would have imagined. And we definitely felt a sense of loss. And I never felt like I was losing my children, but I did feel like I was losing the future that I had imagined for them. So if any of you are parents, you may do what we did and kind of look into the future and see our kids with partners and careers and families, if that's what they wanted. And I had to wonder during this time, would any of that ever happen? I felt like I was looking at our future through a kaleidoscope, and everything that I thought that I knew was all thrown up in the air, and I had no idea what it would look like when things settled down. I also felt angry. There were a lot of times that I would say, why couldn't my kids just have been born in the bodies that felt right for them? And finally, I felt afraid. And I have to say, there are not, even now, there are not many days that I don't feel afraid for my kids, either emotional or at times even physical well-being. So in the midst of all these emotions, there were lots of tasks that needed to happen. We needed to find doctors and therapists. We dealt with our kids' school. We executed name changes, changes on passports, licenses, and all of that. And at the time, all this felt very, very overwhelming. But looking back, I think for me, it was helpful to have this kind of to-do list. It kept me moving in the direction that my kids needed me to be going. And one of those tasks that we needed to do was find new wardrobes for my daughters. And it makes me laugh when I think about this, because I was so completely out of my depth. I had no idea where to buy clothes for these young women. And I clearly remember one day I was shopping at a mall, and I found myself following around a group of teenage girls to see where they were shopping. And I know that sounds crazy and maybe a little creepy, but for me at the time, it was so important for me to get my kids' clothing right, whatever that meant. And I think it was because I felt that was the only way that I could affect how they were seen by the world. And maybe I felt like it was the only way that I had to keep them safe. One of the other things that we needed to do was talk with family and friends about these changes. And luckily they were and continue to be incredibly supportive of my daughters and our family. But even with all the support, there were so many difficult conversations with people who were grappling with these changes. Some of the questions and the comments were really difficult for me to hear and answer. However, I tried to remember that I had had a head start coming to terms with these changes, and that with time and education, everyone else would come on board as well. I do remember a conversation with a woman whose son was really good friends with my younger daughter before she transitioned. And I could tell, as you know, by her face as I'm telling her this, that she was really struggling with this news. But she tries to rally at the end, and she says to me, you know, I'm going to tell him if he sees her around town, he should still say hi to her, because you know what, she's still a person. And I had to admit that, yes, she's still a person. And I think what upset me most about this comment was the idea that my daughter's status as a person, her very humanity, would ever come into question simply because she's transgender. And dealing with family, I think one of the most poignant things for me was watching the older members of our family, particularly my mom and my father-in-law, as they came to terms with these changes. So I know that they probably had lots of stereotypes or preconceived notions about transgender people. And I know that many of those were probably not positive. But when they saw that these transgender people were the people that they had cared for and loved all their lives, they really quickly became two of their greatest champions. And all of us can learn a lesson from my 86-year-old father-in-law, who never once used the wrong pronouns for my daughters. So in the course of my personal life and professional life, I talk with a lot of parents of transgender kids. And I remember one particular conversation with a man whose child had just come out, and he was dealing with a lot of the same emotions that I described a few minutes ago. And at the end of the conversation, he says to me, I'm really sorry that this happened to you too. And I didn't know how to answer that, because while I would do anything to make my daughter's lives easier, I would do anything to make their lives safer, I really wouldn't want them to be any different. They are these amazing, strong, incredible young women, and I wouldn't want to change a thing. So for us, it's been 7 years since we started this journey, and the dust has really settled. Although I know that my kids will have many challenges to make and decisions to make going forward. And I don't mean to say that we have all the answers or that it's easy, because we don't, and it's not. There are days and weeks that are really hard. But what I do know is that, first of all, it's not the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning. It's not the last thing I think about anymore when I go to bed at night. And I know that in the beginning, I really had kind of focused on what I had lost. But now I really can see clearly how much I have gained. I have 3 children who are brave enough and strong enough to go out in the world every single day as the people they know themselves to be, and they will stand by each other no matter what. And I could not be more proud of them. I also know when I look into the future now, they will have partners, they will have careers, they will have families if that's what they want. It won't be like what I originally thought it was going to look like, but it will look like what they want it to look like. And that is so much more important. So thank you for being here.
Tracy, thank you so much for sharing your story. That's really beautiful and speaks to the love that you have for all of your children. It's a very just palpable. Yeah, I think we have a few questions if you're open to that. I will start it off, and Oscar and I will kind of take turns. But yeah, how did you manage the feeling of loss when your children came out to you?
Well, I think it was really, it took me a while, and it was a lot of education. And I remember not, well, I will shamelessly plug PFLAG, but I went to a support group, and I remember going, and there was, first of all, people there who had, you know, adult trans kids who were thriving. I remember they brought in a trans woman who worked for McKinsey, and she talked about how amazing things were going for her. So I think slowly over time, when I could see, you know, this is going to be okay, I just kind of shifted my vision, and then, you know, that loss kind of fell away because I knew they were going to be okay.
That's great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tracy. Oh, sorry. I'm going to ask the next question. So do you have any advice for parents who have a trans child? Who like is specifically at the start of their transition, I would say.
Yeah, I guess two things I would say. One is that recognize that, and this is kind of a mistake that we made, is that your kids probably have been thinking about this for a really long time. It feels very sudden to you, and they may want to transition, or they may want to look into medical care, and it seems like such a quick thing happening. But again, know that they've been thinking about this for a long time. So if they tell this to you, to kind of get on board as quickly as you can. And the other thing is just to get support for yourself. I think whatever that looks like, some people are not support group people, support groups or friends or therapists or family, you need to have someone who you can rely on, because I think it's important, because there are feelings, as I've described, that aren't particularly positive. You don't want to work out your feelings of loss with your child. Work that out. You need to address that, and they're real. Work it out with somebody else, and then you can be fully present for your child. But you need to have some place where you can express those emotions and get that support.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Kind of not quite a follow-up, but do you have any advice for helping other family members to talk about, come to terms with a child's gender transition, gender journey? Like, what tools and resources did you find helpful for like nudging folks along?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on the person and how quickly you think they'll get on board. Sometimes it takes people longer. I think a good thing is always to provide resources, to give people, reading material, send them videos, and anything that you can do to educate. Some people are going to take that better than others. Some people are slower to get onto those resources than others. But I think the best thing is to just provide those resources. And also, I think one thing that was really helpful to us is to remind people that these are the same people. These are the same people. I remember my daughter talking to my mother, and she wrote her a beautiful letter about how she felt. And in it, she said, Grammy, think about, it's like you have a phone that you really love. It's got all your favorite photographs, all your favorite apps, you really love it. And then you get a new case. It's the same phone, it just looks different. And that was really helpful to many of my family members.
That's really helpful. That's kind of a selfish question for myself of like, okay, yeah, how do we move parents along and guardians along and educators along to a place of understanding, and then ultimately acceptance and affirmation, not tolerance. We're not gonna, that's
right.
Not even, understanding, accepting, and affirming.
And I think too, there's a difference between when you're talking about it theoretically, and people have feelings and all kinds of stuff. But when they see personally, I think that makes a huge difference. It moves people in a way that just thinking about it in a theoretical way does not.
Absolutely. That's why our speakers are so important. Thank you for being here.
So one more question I have is, what do you feel like was your biggest challenge when it came to supporting your children? If there was like one thing that really stands out, and like, how did you push through that or manage it?
I would say, there's so many challenges, and you just have to push through, right? You got to put all the other stuff, all your feelings on the side, and just push through. But I think that one of the biggest challenges, and I alluded to this earlier, is, and one thing I wish I would do differently, is that we made them wait a long time. they came out and I said right away, I said, I support you 100%. We will do whatever you need. I love you. I support you. But then we said, okay, but you need to be sure. You need to be sure. And we put them off and off and off. And now, of course, I realized that wasn't about them being sure. It was me needing to take the time. So I wish that I had pushed through that a little bit sooner. But I think that you just push through it. You get your support and you just move because you know that that's what they need.
Right.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it's very easy, I think, for parents to kind of be like, oh, no, let's just wait until, my parents were very similar when I came out. Very much like, oh, we support you if this is what you really wanted to do, but we need to make sure. And like you said before, like, these people have been the youth have actually been thinking about this for a long time, and in some regard their whole life probably. And so like, when someone comes out to you, it's because they're pretty sure probably.
Parents and kids are just in such a different space at that moment, and I think that is a huge challenge, and hard to make the right balance.
Right, definitely. I really quick before we do the last question or two, right, Renee? I'm just gonna send a little link in the chat to everybody. If you guys have a second, we would love to get some feedback. It's just a little Google form survey. You can open it and put it aside for a few minutes if you want. Cool. Renee, do you want to ask the next question?
For sure. I think the last question is kind of a segue into the second session. And thanks, Oscar, for putting the eval in there. I know we don't have a lot of people here live, and some folks have kind of trickled in, but yeah, we value your feedback. It helps us to improve our trainings and make it even better for the next crew, the next round of participants. So thank you in advance for filling that out. Last question for this session, Tracy, is how did you deal with other people who are transphobic, specifically within school settings?
If you come back to the next session, we will talk more. I'll share my kids' experience with that. It's just with schools, and again, I'll get more in depth with that. You just have to be your kid's advocate, and you just have to push and push and be that advocate. But in general, I guess our stance was, we were going to provide people whatever resources they needed to be on board with us. And I was gonna help them along. But in the end, if there was anybody who couldn't get past it, who was transphobic, I mean, we had just made the decision that those people, no matter who they were, would no longer be part of our family, because I couldn't expose my kids to people who couldn't be completely and wholeheartedly accepting of them. So thankfully, we never had to get to that point, but that was something that we were definitely prepared to do, because like, as you said before, I didn't want people just tolerating my kids. They needed to accept and celebrate them. And if they couldn't do that, they didn't get to be around them.
Thank you so much for the little preview for the next session. For your vulnerability and sharing your very personal experiences and that of your family. And I'm glad you didn't have to, cut family out, that you were educatable, and you were able to meet them where they were at and help, but not leave them there, help move them along with the right kind of education and resources. So we're at time. So thank you everybody for hopping on and for watching this. If you're checking out the recording after, I'm gonna pass the mic back to Katrisha.
Thank you, Renee, Oscar, and Tracy. We will now take a break from 11 to 11:15, and then we will meet back up for the remainder for the next session.
That's good. See y'all in a bit.
Thank you.
Oscar, you still here?
Yes.
Can we just stay on this? Is it right on the same link?
Oh, it's still recording, but yes, it's the same link.
All right, so I'll just leave it open and hop back. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing, Tracy.
Okay.
Samesies.